All righty. Well, welcome to this week's episode of Grow or Die. I am Laura Chestikoff from Firebird Summit. And as usual, I got my partner Lawrence with me. Hey, Lawrence.
Hey, how's it going, everyone? Great to be back.
All righty. Well, this week we have decided to take a departure from our normal mystery box approach, fun as that always is. And we are joined with a longtime friend and colleague of mine, Ms. Shana Storey. Hi, Shana.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me.
So this week, we are obviously all dealing with some weirdness. For those not watching in real time, it is the middle of March 2020, and in addition to being on major lockdown throughout all parts of the country, we have also just now seen banner headlines on all the major press that we have now entered a global recession. So in addition to the health implications, we now have to be very, very aware of the financial implications. So this week, we're going to focus on the business implications of COVID-19. So to get things started, I want to toss out the first question to Shana. And, Shana works in with a lot of organizations that are dealing with it, and many of them have offices in the APEC region. So I figured we'd start with Shana, what are kind of some of the lessons that your international offices have seen from their first cutting edge of this particular fund?
Sure, and I may not be so close to my colleagues over in APEC, but I have been seeing quite a few reports coming out of there and lessons learned from a lot of HR leaders in that space. That the first and foremost lesson learned is they've gotten through it, and so they may still have some things going on. There may still be some residual effects. But the fact that you're seeing people kind of move through it, kind of get back to work as normal or get back to work as most normal as possible is probably the most encouraging thing. The second is being patient and figuring things out. Every day things change. And I think in the States, we're seeing that, in the EU, we're seeing that as well. And so as our colleagues went through it in East Asia, we're starting to feel that as well. So there's also a lot of business continuity things that I think people are concerned about, and that's equipment and getting equipment over here. I think one of the other lessons we're seeing is just to be patient and be mindful of what everybody is going through, and that, things may not be as instantaneous as they had been in the past. But they're moving in, we will figure it out together. And our colleagues over in China and in Japan have been saying, hey, we've got this. We will work through this with you.
Okay. So I guess the first question then, outside of international implications, is kind of what is it that you would recommend for managers who are suddenly finding themselves in a situation where they're working from home, their staff is working from home, and nobody's ever had to necessarily do this before?
So not only are there complexity about them working from home for maybe the first time, their teams working from home the first time, their colleagues working from home for the first time, they also suddenly have a spouse or set of roommates who are working from home as well for the first time. And a lot of people are seeing that having children at home who are also kind of working from home because they're starting to go to school online, and maybe they haven't had to do that before. And so the first and foremost is try and find some quiet space. I think that would be the first thing, both mentally and physically. In a small apartment in New York City, it's really hard to do that, but hopefully if you are dialing in from another area, you probably have started thinking about where to connect. But I've been on calls with people this week who've been taking video conference chats from laundry rooms in the basement. This is the only place they can find quiet space. And so the second is be flexible with your team. They may not have the most ideal location to call in from. And so don't pressure people to put on video because they may not be able to put on video. It's great to have that face-to-face communication, but it's not always possible for everybody, especially if you have roommates or kids in the background running around. And yes, roommates do run around on occasion. And I think the third is make sure you're setting really strong boundaries for yourself during the day. When you work from home, and I've been doing the work from home and running remote teams for more than 10 years, it's you are tempted to work 10, 12 hours straight with forgetting lunch, forgetting to get up, especially with more of a lockdown kind of view. You're not getting outside as much. You're not going out for coffee in the morning. And so creating that boundary at home, either through a designated space in your house or just making sure you're carving out time to step away and have lunch with your family or have lunch with the people who are also working from home. And so those are things to just be mindful of and kind of think through as a leader to take care of yourself first. That way you can also take care of your team at the same time.
And Lawrence, you have a question?
No, that's actually that's huge, and I love you telling people to be patient with the process and be respectful of this experience for everybody, because I'm married to an educator. And so for the first time, educators are trying to figure this thing out, and with Google Classroom and her being an administrator. So how do you navigate people that would 100% of the time going into a school now being tied to a laptop for a designated amount of time to interact with kids they don't know will or will not show up based on their own connectivity issues, and that frustration of how do we report, what do reports look like? And so that and I love Alora's point of asking about, what does headspace look like in the midst of this chaos and anxiety, and again taking into account if you have children, what's happening with them and this uprooting of this normal lifestyle. But I love the point of just be patient. Let's stay calm. And I was watching CNN the other day, and the reporter was like, look, everyone, let's not freak out. Like, our kids are used to technology. It's time for us to get used to technology and wrap our minds around what this really looks like. And I would just say for you, what are some of the things that are coming up for a lot of your colleagues as far as the anxiety that's out there?
I'm going to first and foremost say I've doubled down on my own mindfulness practice. I've started working on better meditation. I've started taking meditation classes that are virtual and online and free. United Mindfulness is I'm not promoting their program. I'm just saying United Mindfulness offers a really great way to learn how to meditate and be mindful and kind of manage your own stress. I think that piece is really, really important. I journal, but that's not been what has been helpful for me this time. It's been taking a step back and taking a breath, and staying centered. There's so much bombardment of everything going on. For other people, I have friends who have started dancing at home to kind of get that stress out, because it's giving them a place to not be at work and to think about things, and that giving their brain space time to relax, which I think when we're under stress and anxiety, if you don't carve it, it's not going to happen.
So I think one of the things that I love about what you just said, Lawrence, also is, for people who have not historically worked from home, this can be really tough. But I think everybody's kids are so used to screen addictions, and I'll skip my rant for why we shouldn't be letting kids get addicted to screens, but the truth is a lot of them already are. So I think for the kids, it's that part isn't necessarily the hard part. It's the schedule disruption. I think, I've been talking to my friends who are parents, and for them, that's some of the hardest piece is how do we get some normalcy from a routine perspective? Because that's not only important for the kids, but that's important to make sure the parents don't kill the kids, because everybody starts getting cabin fever and starts getting crazy.
Some of the things I've had some colleagues mention that they're doing with their children is getting up a little bit earlier and getting that routine going, and then also spending quality time with their family and making family priority the first thing in the morning, not checking email, not immediately starting the day, but sitting down, having breakfast together, almost so much that your kids get sick of you. So then they get enough of mom and dad or enough of their siblings that maybe they can take a step back, and then they're okay to not attach to the leg during phone calls and things like that. And I think that goes for having pets too. I mean, you get up, you walk your dog, you get outside at least for a few minutes. It could be beneficial to establish having that same rhythm with your kids in the morning, getting up, walking the kids with the dog, making it a family event. So you get that bonding before the day kind of moves into motion. And, as much as this is a really stressful time, it's giving us all an opportunity to reset some of our habits and boundaries in a way that I don't think we've ever been forced to, because right now we don't have a choice about it. And so we can make choices to do things healthy, or we can make choices to kind of continue what we've been doing and work really hard and not take that step back and not take the opportunity to bond with our family in the morning or in the afternoon, or, carving that time in your schedule for a break. And that break including other people, not just doing your email on the fly.
So I think that is a really awesome point. I have a weakness for a specific topic, which is the amount of television that people consume, right? I mean, Shana knows I don't have a TV in my house. I got rid of my cable back in 1998. And I have not had TV in my life since.
Wow.
And I see how frustrated I get when I find myself in situations. Restaurants and bars are really bad. Airports and other ones, sometimes airplanes, where I am sort of forced into a confined space with television, and I watch kind of the anxiety level that, depending on what's on, I start like sort of absorbing. And I think it's a really interesting thing to watch when people, find themselves sort of trapped and consuming a lot of news, especially a lot of hysterical stuff that's going on. I think it's fundamentally, I think it's something that we should all question how healthy it is and how much of it we really want. But I think especially when you're finding yourself in a confined space with other people who are also trapped in that space, maybe it's a good opportunity to stop and ask, how much TV do we need to have on? Like, what's actually helpful versus what starts really kind of just piling on extra anxiety because we're consuming a lot of more regurgitated histrionics with no new information. I mean, I think there's a line between what constitutes new valuable information that we want versus what's just hysterical navel gazing that we need to just shut up. And I think this is probably a really good place to force it, because a lot of times we go to the office, we might have, TVs on at work, depending on what kind of work environment you're in, but you do kind of get away from it. I think a lot of people have gotten in the habit of when they're home, the TV is on. And so when you're home, working from home, and the kids are home and everybody's home and you've got a house full of people, does the TV also always need to be on? And is it helpful? I mean, if it's something that's helping keep things calm, that might be one thing, but is it actually ramping up or amping up the anxiety that's going on? In which case, I don't know, maybe it's time to question the value of that habit.
Yeah. And Shana, you bring up a really great point about this new rule that's hopefully being written in everybody's household of how are we checking in with each other, and from a very authentic place of leaders not just having your employees check in with you, but you checking on your employees and making sure and see how they're actually doing. Into your point, Alora, of is the TV on in the background? And some of the most powerful pictures I've seen in this time is the parents actually at the table with their kids with whiteboards and doing homework. And people from our church have created a teacher parent support group because now mom has to actually do third grade math. and
they have third grade math in a long time. That's terrible.
And so now they're like, oh my God, somebody please help. And so we have all these teachers a part of our community. And so it's this miraculous thing happening. And my hope is that people aren't just pressing pause just to go back to those old rules. And Shane, what I want from you is, what are your HR leaders who, and again, not saying it's everybody, but my interactions with most HR professionals they've been very transactional in the way that they go about their daily business. How are they now dealing with people not dropping in and robbing them of valuable time?
Yeah, I think there's two things I wanted to mention. You made mention about your church building out a resource group. What does it, and you as managers and leaders reaching out to your people, what does it look like if you build an employee resource group that's all struggling through the same thing? So if you have the opportunity to just build an informal network within your remote environment or your office when you go back to a brick and mortar establishment, but what does it look like to support each other? I am sure someone else is struggling with third grade math on your team. You guys should totally bond over it and work through the problems. And I think it allows us to take this opportunity where, there's a little bit more of a blurry line between personal and work. What's to say that kids can't play online with each other like this? Mom and another mom are talking to each other, and maybe kids are on the same Zoom and you have a conversation. It's not just us who are going to be starved for social interaction. The younger people are probably going to be way more starved for being around their friends and being around their peers than we are. The second is I've been very fortunate. Most of my roles in HR are not at all transactional, and I've always worked in teams that are very strategic. So I can't really speak to like the transactional process of being an HR generalist and kind of managing that. How do you get through that without disruption? But I can speak to the fact that I'm seeing a lot of people work outside their comfort zone for a lot of different ways, whether that's they're working remote and they've never done it, or they're suddenly being asked to support a wider variety of work because their colleague might be out sick, or just because the needs look a little bit different when you're at home versus when you're in the office, because people aren't stopping by your desk to ask you questions. And so I am seeing people be flexible and have to be open-minded about what their workday looks like, but that doesn't mean you need to be, at the beck and call of every single text message you get and every single phone call you get. And I'm finding that people who are transactional are setting aside a time throughout the day to deal with email or to go on do not disturb, so then they can do some of the work that is transactional where they can't be interrupted by bombardments of phone calls and text messages and chats on Skype.
So that actually raises another interesting thing, right? The transactional nature of a lot of what we do gets us, busy and distracted. My background has been heavily in retail, travel, and hospitality, which are three industries that are kind of grinding to a halt at the moment. I just found out that, one of my largest clients is basically shutting down most of their locations because they're in shopping malls. One of my partners is on a project that is all shopping mall based. So they're completely bringing everything to a halt as well. And I think part of the transactional thing that has kept people moving and kept giving them something to focus on while they're, all the stress is surfacing around and kind of floating around, has now come to a halt. And I think it's creating this deafening silence that's actually now really freaking people out, because now we're back to, am I going to have a job when this is over? And a lot of people won't. So I think that's one of those things that, there's not an easy answer for that, because right now it's a little bit hard to predict, right? I think the duration of this process will determine a lot of the recovery options, but especially if you do work in retail or you do work in, hospitality and travel that are enormously impacted. Shana and I first worked together in the travel space. And so it's very hard to, not remember what it looked like, after the last kind of big economic meltdowns that kind of brought travel to a halt. And so retail right now, I think, is the place where I'm seeing it already surfaced the most. Retail, quick serve restaurants, places like that, where everything's closed. I mean, the Starbucks on my corner where Shana and I've had coffee, everything's, at first it was just grab and go. Now they're mostly shut down, and, all the chairs are stacked inside in the corner, and you can come in long enough to grab your stuff and hightail it out. All the restaurants along where I live in Miami, everything's closed down except the ones that can do digital ordering. Run in, grab your stuff, and go. And so there's a lot of people that, used to work that aren't working, and there are people who didn't make very much. And what's going to happen at the end of this? And I think that's a real fear factor. And I think managers are probably the first place to tackle that. So I don't know, Shana, what are your thoughts on that?
I've been thinking about this a lot. I live in New York City, like I shared, and, a lot of New York City is built on immigrants who are not making a lot of money and who are working in the restaurant industry as delivery people in the back of the house. And I've been so worried about how these people are going to, maintain housing and get food. So this is something that is like near and dear to my heart on a daily basis. I'm worried about people I know, not mythological people who are out there, but people I talk to every day. And so I myself, I just kind of, when you can and where you can, support your community. Without your community, we are no stronger without each other. So where you can spend time, or make sure your neighbor gets food where they may not be able to go out because they have a compromised immune system. I wanted to, like you in the TV, Laura, for me, this is a moment of if we have a chance to be better people, this is a time where we need to be better people. Not a please be better people, but more of a do one good thing a day for somebody who may not be able to do it for themselves, or maybe at a risk. Sorry, I went on a soapbox there. Clearly it's something I care about. I think, I don't even remember your question, Laura.
Well, so I think it was about managers being kind of that front line of helping people who are worried about whether or not they're going to have a job at the end of this.
Yeah. Okay. So none of us have a crystal ball. None of us know if we're going to be employed tomorrow. I think that is unfortunate situation. Without the situation, we face it anyway every day, just because of how employment works and how unstable the economy seems to be. But the thing you can do is be as transparent as possible with your team. Bring them along for the journey. What you know, they should know. Unless you were sworn to secrecy about it, help them kind of prepare and think through different things. And the second is, if you do know your team is kind of moving into a space where there may not have an employment option, or you know for a fact that you are not going to be employed there anymore, and your team is likely to also be in the same boat, work together to get resumes with each other, resource with each other, and help support each other. Again, it's the community thing. We're in this together. It's not we're in this for one person and and that is ourselves.
Yeah, I love that you said that. Just over communication in this world that we live in now is key. And like you said, not only that's an awesome idea of the employee resource groups, just around these commonalities of, we know anxiety is happening, we know just this unknown is out in front of us, but how do we get there together? And I think managers are now being asked to have necessary conversations, not uncomfortable, and again, it may be uncomfortable for you, but understand the people who are leaning on you, depending on you, to have these conversations. There is no more, I can wait on my director to push an email out. Well, now, no, your people are depending on you, because everybody's decentralized now. You're the person that they're coming to. They're not emailing your director. They're not checking in with your director. They're checking in with you. And I think, again, like you said, as much as you can share. Like, don't leave people in limbo. One of the organizations I used to support in a production environment, in a manufacturing, think about that, 24-hour manufacturing environments that are now having these orders come in, and you can't have more than 50 people in the plant at the same time. It's blowing these non-essential personnel. Okay, so in that production environment, who's non-essential, right? It's what is the rotation of who comes in, when they come in, and what do they come in for? And I think now is the time for organizations to practice and begin to fail forward as it pertains to communicating and getting good at something that, let's be frank, just wasn't practiced in a lot of organizations. And so I'm thinking getting comfortable being uncomfortable is going to be a t-shirt that we need to go ahead and patent, because that is going to be everybody's slogan moving forward.
Well, so, oh, sorry, go ahead, Shana.
Go ahead, Laura.
So, one of the things that I think is really important about what you just said, Lawrence, we talk about working from home, and, for those of us who work on a computer all day, working from home is not, I mean, that is what it is, right? But if you work in construction, or you work in manufacturing, or you work, in any, and we can move out of the direct services industries that are shut down at the moment, like restaurants and retail establishments. But if you work in that kind of almost that B2B space, right? That very sort of heavy industry kind of model, where it's still very physically present as a job. That's a work from home option that doesn't exist there, right? To your point, right? You have a manufacturing so who's non-essential? Now, to be fair, most manufacturers have already stripped out anybody who's non-essential anyway, because they've done that as a function of cutbacks. They've automated as much as they can. They've completely stripped that away. But then who does that leave? And how do you manage that? I think the really, really important part of this is, and I don't want to contribute to histrionics, but this isn't going to be the last time we do this. There was a really fantastic TED talk about the nature of what causes the surfacing of this kind of virus. And it specifically has a lot to do with different environmental factors, us trekking into parts of the world that historically have not had human contact, about the evolution of of viruses that have been able to get better at jumping species. And I mean, there's so many things that when you really look at it, we have to learn how to solve for this. And this is not going to be the last time we do this. This is not going to be the only time in our lifetime this happens. And how we respond now, while, tinged with the first time nature of hysteria in that regard, is going to have to come with some lessons on how do we solve for this really when it surfaces again.
It's not only solving from a mass pandemic situation, but the impacts of automation and even to more workers that are computer based. What's that going to do in the long run? So I think we have to start thinking about this not just as a one-off situation at all. It's all the time. How do we continue evolving and helping make sure people are employed and have opportunities to contribute to society? And I think it's not just related to the COVID situation. It's a bigger issue. And I think there's a lot of people facing unemployment outside of this, especially as automation comes into play.
Well, and I think that's another really important aspect of this, right? In the U.S., we take a more automation first approach because labor is expensive. But one of the realities and one of the reasons that so much gets offshored to particularly Southeast Asia, sometimes Latin America, but definitely Southeast Asia, is because labor is much cheaper and they don't have to rely on automation. But that's where you have definite potential for a pandemic. So all of a sudden, it doesn't really matter what business you're in, your supply chain has just been hit pretty hard one way or the other. There's not there again, we're back to this has to be part of how we think about how we organize businesses, how we come up with any kind of resiliency plans that we need. What does that look like? So as we kind of approach a wrap up here, Shana, how about if you wrap us up with kind of what it is that you have found in terms of resources that you think are useful and places for people to continue to kind of keep an eye on. How do we figure out what business as normal looks like in a world where we have to assume this is going to become somewhat normal?
So the beauty of this downside, or the silver lining of this big storm cloud, is we are all going through this at the same exact time. Organizations are all solving for the same problem. So you have groups like Gartner and McKinsey who are publishing free available stuff all the time online, articles about business planning, business continuity, business resiliency. What do business continuity teams look like? How do the roles fit together? I saw a great article from McKinsey last night, maybe it was the day before, about that. Gartner's been publishing research around some of the work coming out of East Asia and the lessons learned. And they've also put together some really great resources. There's a live webinar on Friday done by Cornell, so Cornell University, and it's about, it's really about leadership through communication. So once again, communication is like the thing we need to be doing. And I think there's other opportunities like groups like Cornerstone, who runs the learning management system. They have open source courses around preparing for this, how to work from home for the first time, how to deal with being on conference calls for the first time, and all the way down to things about how to manage your own stress and anxiety during kind of a very large mass situation where people are under a lot of pressure. I think the other is, remember to not only resource for your team, but I mentioned earlier, to make sure you're being mindful for yourself, whatever that looks like. A lot of us work out to manage stress, and not being able to go to the gym is really hard, but what does it look like for you to be able to manage stress in this environment? And how do you make sure you're role modeling that as a leader to the people that you work with, your colleagues, your peers, the team that reports to you? Because each of us as leaders has to come to the table with our best selves. And if we're not taking care of ourselves, we can't do that. And I know there's times where you can't take care of yourself as much as you want to, especially in high stress environments, if you work in aviation or you're customer facing. But if you're not there for yourself, you can't be there for your team, you definitely can't be there for your customer.
Very good. Lawrence, any final thoughts from you?
No, that was a great wrap up. No, it was a pleasure being able to have this conversation with you tonight, Shana, and thank you for having this time. And Laura, again, thank you for creating this platform for us to talk about these things.
Well, unfortunately, we never seem to be short on complicated stuff that throws a monkey wrench in our lives when we least expect it. So anyway, thank you so much, Shana and Lawrence. To Shana's point, I actually do have an Eventbrite event that I set up for next week a couple times actually for introduction to managers trying to manage teams remotely. Like Shana, I've been doing it for a lot longer than I thought. It was not something I ever expected to become an expert in, but hey, what do you know? It happens. So you can find that on Eventbrite if you look me up. Otherwise, we will be back to our regularly scheduled Grow or Die episodes next week, where I will get my chance to surprise Lawrence with the topic, and we'll return then. In the meantime, please stay safe, sane, and do as much as you can to manage your own mental health as well as the time you get with your family. So take care, and we'll talk to you next week.
All right. See you later.
Thank you for having me.
Bye, guys.